Good morning. Welcome to our March NHD Subcommittee meeting. Happy Women's History Month. We'll begin our meeting with a call to the public. Thank you to everyone who's joined us here today. Most of our cards today are for item 10. So with that, we will go to approval of the subcommittee meeting minutes from February. Do we have a motion?
I move the approval of February 16th, 2016 minutes.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Excellent. We have a consent agenda today. Items 5 through 7 are for consent action. No presentation is planned, but staff is available to answer questions if any of my colleagues have any.
I move the consent agenda items 5 through 7.
I'll second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously.
I have a question about item number 4.
All right, item number 4, Section 8 Housing Voucher Choice Waitlist.
My question, Cindy, is if somebody's living, this question came to me, so that's why. If they live in Section 8 or been awarded Section 8 in another state and they are moving to Arizona, they said that they could transfer that voucher. Once they get to Arizona, what happens? Do they go on a wait list? How does that play out?
Madam Chair and Councilwoman Pastor, once you have a voucher, you have a voucher. So if you move to another state, you come to this jurisdiction, you have to go through a process where we accept your voucher, but you continue to have your voucher. You do not go on another wait list.
Oh, you do not?
No.
Okay, so I'll help my constituent because that's what's happening. That's why I'm like, I'm not sure how this works. Okay, got it. Thank you.
And so this is an item opening up the waiting list, which we have not for quite some while. And maybe you could just speak briefly, we're going to be also doing some education in the community about Section 8 for both neighbors and potential applicants.
Yes, Madam Chair, this is the first time we've opened the Section 8 wait list since 2005. We had 30,000 on the wait list in 2005, so it's taken us 11 years to get through that wait list. We're down to about 2,000 now. So it's time to open it up again. Our strategy is to only accept up to 10,000 this time, so we don't have another 11 years before we open the wait list again, so make sure we have the turnover and current folks who need housing on it. With this campaign, we're going to have a communication campaign to get the word out that we're opening up the wait list, and at the same time, we're going to try to educate both landlords and proposed tenants, or prospective tenants on the Section 8 program. Obviously, all the details, what it takes to be a landlord, what the landlord responsibilities are to the tenants and to the community, especially landlords of single-family homes in HOAs. We have a lot of education for the tenants for those areas. And then also education for the tenants on, what kind of incomes qualify for Section 8 and how they get on the wait list, and basically about the program. So we're working on a website and a communication plan. So we're going to get flyers out at the beginning of April to talk about all of this, and there will be a website landing page. The application will be online, and it will come off of that website, so you'll be able to go to the same website you've been going on for information for a month, and then go to that same website, and there's a link to the application once we open up the application.
Wonderful. And we did get some inquiries about whether we have other city programs, including fighting domestic violence, and whether we could prioritize certain groups who would be eligible for Section 8.
Councilwoman, we have a number of priorities that go along with Section 8 vouchers, and they include chronically homeless, veterans. There are certain vouchers that are dedicated to those. We have a number of vouchers that are dedicated to victims of domestic violence as well. So we have those priorities set. So once those people apply, we can prioritize those and get them vouchers quicker than the general population.
Wonderful. Thank you. Any additional questions on Section 8? All right. Thank you so much. We will see you back later in the meeting. Now we're moving to item number 8, White House Employers of National Service Initiative, and welcome up Michael Hammett, our volunteer coordinator, as well as Kimberly Will, who is the Arizona State Director for the Corporation for National and Community Service, our partner on all things AmeriCorps Vista, and Rhonda Wilson, Deputy Human Resources Director. This is a good news story for us. We in Arizona are leading the way, so I'll turn it over to Michael Hammett to give us the update.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the council. We are so excited to be here today. We are talking about the City of Phoenix's commitment to the White House Employers of National Service, and that is a national initiative to create a pathway to employment for alumni of national service, which would be Peace Corps and AmeriCorps members. I will start by introducing those up here with me today. We have Kimberly Will, who is the State Director for Corporation for National and Community Service, and Rhonda Wilson from our Human HR department. So we'll be talking about a little bit about what the City of Phoenix is doing. So I'll pass it off to Kimberly first to get started.
Thank you so much. Good morning. Thank you for having me. So as Michael has mentioned, Employers of National Service was launched at the White House in September of 2014 as part of the 20th anniversary of AmeriCorps. Our goal for Employers of National Service is to link employers from the private, public, and nonprofit communities to our highly qualified, motivated, and talented alumni from both AmeriCorps and Peace Corps. Our partners in this initiative are, of course, we are one of the leaders, which is our federal agency, the Corporation for National and Community Service. Partnering with us are our alumni associations from AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, and our nonprofit partner, the Franklin Project. One more. Thank you. I want to share with you all, as Michael has mentioned, that Arizona is leading the states in the country in this initiative with Councilwoman Gallego's support and other champions of national service in our community and in Arizona. We are proud to report that we are now at 36 employers. We've gained a few more even since we've submitted the information to you all for this morning's presentation. And we are very pleased about this. I am also pleased to share that we've just created an internal goal of hoping to secure 40 employers by one of our benchmark dates, which is our Mayor's Day and County Day of Recognition, which will be held April 5th. And hopefully we will secure 50 employers by the end of this fiscal year. We are also proud to share that we were one of the first states in the country to have on board the first university, which was Arizona State University, the first county, which was Coconino County, and we are the first state to have all 3 state universities on board, ASU, U of A, and NAU. As well, I would like to recognize the City of Phoenix for a leader in this initiative. You are the first city in Arizona to partner with us in this initiative, so thank you. And I think the most important piece of this is that we're really looking to retain our talent from AmeriCorps and Peace Corps, encouraging them that once they're finished with their service to stay in Arizona and make Arizona their home, and hopefully the Phoenix metro area their home. So I should share that Arizona has one of the largest populations of returned Peace Corps volunteers in the country, due to a very successful Cordell Fellow program at the U of A. And Peace Corps graduates around 200,000 individuals annually, which we have estimated at least 200 living in the Phoenix metro area. As well as with AmeriCorps, we have 774 individuals serving in Maricopa County, with 439 estimated serving within the city of Phoenix. So again, our hope is that these individuals who have come from out of state or have come from out of country choose to stay in Arizona and in Phoenix and make this wonderful place their home. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. And so the City of Phoenix, as Kimberly mentioned, we signed on as an employer of service right at the get-go, and that is thanks to the support of the mayor, council members, and the city manager's office to really say we want to participate in this initiative. And what we've learned at the city is how important and how vital these folks are that have served in national service. And we have seen it firsthand, and we continue to see it firsthand every day. We currently have 20 part-time AmeriCorps members, and those AmeriCorps members are stationed throughout the city. They're working everywhere from police to human services and in our youth and education office doing literacy programs, which is just vital. They're embedded in the schools, which is wonderful. We also have 8 full-time AmeriCorps Vista members. These young people, we're joined today by our AmeriCorps Vista cohort. We have Cole from Councilwoman Gallego's office. We have Sarah, who is serving with Public Works. Nick and Olivia, they're 2 of our newest. They're Cities of Service Resilience AmeriCorps members. And we have Helen and Haley. They are both working a combination between the Volunteer Phoenix program and neighborhood services. They're working on the Love Your Block initiative through Cities of Service. So we're so pleased to have them. And they are the best example of what it means to be an alum of National Service. So we could not be prouder of having these folks on board with us. And really, it's made possible. We have Kimberly Will here, and she leads all efforts related to AmeriCorps and National Service in the state of Arizona. And that is really why it's made possible. And we couldn't do it without our partners. We're so pleased today to have Mi Young Lee and her team here with us today. They're sitting over here to my left here, and they are here to do a site visit and to see what Phoenix is doing with 2 of the grants that they've issued to us. We're the only city in the nation to have both of their grants taking place right now, which we're so pleased, and it's been a great week so far. We also have our partners Hands on Greater Phoenix. They are key to 4 of our current AmeriCorps Vista members that are here and doing amazing things in the community, everything from dealing with veteran homelessness issues through the library to our Public Works Department and sustainability efforts and access to local food to our Neighborhood Services Department and, again, Councilwoman Gallego's office. So we're so excited to have all of these folks and these partners. And I must mention Experience Matters. They are the administrator of working with our Youth and Education Office for our AmeriCorps part-time members that are doing literacy initiatives. And when we did kick off and sign on, many of you remember this big event. It was April of last year, shortly after we signed on, and Kimberly helped put this together. We have the mayor, many of our council members, alumni of National Service, current members of National Service. Some have moved on now. You'll recognize some faces, and it's often surprising who has been in service in the past to our nation. And I will pass it off to Rhonda Wilson now, and Rhonda will talk about what we have been doing to actually fortify our pathway from service to employment.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, as the Deputy Human Resources Director, I have oversight over our Talent Acquisition Division. And I can tell you that we ask all applicants to self-ID themselves in any of these areas. We do this because, for one, it's a requirement to be a national employer, and because we want to track for ourselves just how well we're doing in this area. We do encourage departments when they're doing their hiring to look at this area, or we let them know that it is okay to use this as a criteria when they are selecting candidates to interview. And it really makes sense if that position is something, or a position that goes out into the community that works. They can also look at people that have their public administration degree. We encourage that as well. There are 2 departments, or 2 different classifications that use this volunteer effort as part of their hiring, and that is for police recruit and for management intern. And numbers were ran here just recently, and as of today, there have been a total of 5 individuals that have been hired either from Peace Corps or AmeriCorps with the City of Phoenix.
And that's just since we joined the program, but we have many others, including in the Vice Mayor's office, who joined before we officially joined Employers of National Service, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda. And Madam Chair and council members, these are some of our past alums of National Service and our current cohort. The only 2 that are not in this picture are Nick and Olivia, who have just come on board, and they're really excited about what they're doing. But really, this is a chance to create a pathway for many of these talented folks who are doing so much in the community. And I look forward to having you all meet with our Vistas as they continue to come in. We will have 4 more coming on board in June, as some of you may know, serving in different capacities throughout the city.
Fabulous. We have a lot of employees who are eligible for retirement, and so talent acquisition is a big priority for us at the City of Phoenix. And it's so wonderful to have this pipeline of great folks coming out of national service who are committed to their communities and can go on to continue to serve the City of Phoenix. I am proud to have one of the first alumni of national service in my office and have really benefited from the services of Kara Batdorf, who is here with us today. And throughout our community, we have legislators who are alumni of national service. Dr. Crow, president of Arizona State University, has national service roots. We've had at least one department director come through from national service, so it's a program that continues to give back to us even after the members finish their official terms of national service. I have the pleasure of representing local government on Governor Ducey's Commission on Service and Volunteerism, so get to work with programs throughout the state in that capacity. And I know Councilwoman Pastor and I are chairing My Brother's Keeper together. National Service has been a huge partner for us on third grade literacy, which is one of our goals for young people in our community. And we've had National Service alums helping our Parks Department, many others before. So it's exciting the impact it's had on our community. And if anyone wanted to speak on this agenda item, you can fill out a yellow card and let us know if you're interested in weighing in. We'll turn it on over to my colleagues to see if we have any questions.
I just want to thank you for all the effort that you're doing. Councilwoman, thank you for your effort as well. Looking at that photo on the top left, and three of these brilliant young ladies have worked or currently work in the District 5 office. Bethia Ranasamy is currently in grad school now at Michigan. Vanya on the far right is currently in law school and still in the office. And of course, Haley Steele, who we're all so very proud of, who happens to be in the audience today, who's literally going to change the world.
No pressure.
She's amazing, and her family actually lives in District 5. So we're really proud to call Haley a friend. And Michael, and thank you to our partners. And the city is incredibly fortunate to have Michael Hammett leading the charge here with this effort. Michael, you're talented, you're committed, you're honest, great representative of the city of Phoenix, and we're very fortunate to have you here doing this particular job.
Thank you so much, Vice Mayor.
So if any employers are watching, how could they join Employers of National Service?
Thank you for that. They can go on our website, nationalservice.gov. Under Special Initiatives, there's an entire landing page to employers, and there's an online sign-up section there on the website.
Fabulous.
And Madam Chair and council members, we also have on our website under Jobs and Volunteering, we have a whole section on Employers of National Service and our commitment to the initiative.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, hopefully many people watching will who are alums will apply to join the City of Phoenix, and maybe we'll have some new employers to help you meet your ambitious goal. It's great to have Arizona be #1, and I hope that we will stay there, leading the way in national service.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. We will move on to item number 9, Reinvent Phoenix Strategic Framework Policy Plan Update. And welcome our Planning Director, Alan Stevenson, to the table.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. I also have with me Ms. Sandy Hoffman, who's the Deputy Director within the Planning Division of the Planning Development Department, and Craig Mavis, who oversees our reInvent project, as well as some other duties in long-range planning. The effort we're going to talk about today is really an update to the city's existing strategic framework policy plan that was adopted in 2013 by the mayor and city council to, as a general plan amendment, to guide the overall reInvent Phoenix process for station area types along the light rail line. This adds to some new areas of the light rail that you've all talked about with Mr. Santana an expansion related to that in some key areas, as well as looks at an area along the existing rail line within District 8 as a change there. So with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Hoffman.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Subcommittee members. So this involves the reInvent Phoenix project and some of the things that have come out of that. And what we're doing on the screen is the actual existing map that we have, and we're going to be updating this existing transit-oriented development typology map. And the purpose behind this is to improve the linkage between land use and transportation. And as you can see on the screen, there's 8 types of mixed-use center place types. And this is a classification system that identifies a variety of different degrees of intensity. So the reInvent Phoenix Strategic Framework Policy Plan uses the general plan core values and data to assist in determining the appropriate place types for each station or center. So based on this information, there's 4 of the core value areas that we've included that we'll use when we're evaluating the best type of place type that should be included. I'll pass this to Craig.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. I'm going to briefly cover the public participation as well as the staff recommendation for the place types. Over the course of the past few months, staff has conducted extensive interaction with focus groups and stakeholders. These focus groups consist of property owners, neighborhood residents, neighborhood activists, as well as the stakeholders consisting of the Central City, Camelback East, and South Mountain Village planning committees. Overall, throughout the process, it was very positive. We explained what the purpose of the place types were, how it will guide future development and improve competitiveness for future federal transit funding opportunities for the city. With that, I'm going to quickly go through each of the recommendations for the South Central Light Rail extension. From the north to the south, we have at the Lincoln Street Station, the downtown core place type recommendation. This is the staff recommendation just for clarification. Buckeye Road would be neighborhood center, Audubon Center, medium urban center, Broadway Road, minor urban center, Roser Road, neighborhood center, Southern Avenue, neighborhood center, and finally Baseline Road, medium urban center. Shifting over to the 50th Street Station in the Camelback East Village, it would be the minor urban center recommendation for that future light rail station. The recommendation, as I noted, we went to the Central City, got a positive recommendation with a minor revision that's outlined in your staff report with an addendum A by a vote of 13-3. South Mountain approved this recommendation 12-1. Camelback East unanimously 14-0. Went to the Planning Commission, received unanimous approval with an addendum A. And then the staff recommendation is approval per addendum A with a modification to designate the Baseline Station as medium urban center.
Wonderful.
I have some questions.
Great. Let's start with Councilwoman Pastor's questions.
I would like to go back to the transit-oriented development place types. Can you explain to me, I think it's, you can go back. No.
The next one. That one.
Next one, next one, next one.
No, listen.
The downtown core, what does that mean? I guess I understand because I didn't get it in my briefing. I wanted to know height, is that downtown core, is it the height, the density?
So, Madam Chair, Councilwoman Pastor, that the Lincoln Street one is designated as part of the downtown core because that's where the existing downtown code zoning district applies today. So we do not anticipate increasing the existing entitlements there. It's part of the warehouse district today. And so we would say that stays the same. This plan doesn't do anything to try and increase the entitlements. It just recognizes that in the big picture framework of the place types, the downtown code is what applies down in the Lincoln Street area.
Okay, and then the neighborhood center?
And so the neighborhood center was part of what came out of that discussion with property owners along Buckeye Road within that area. And so, Craig, do you want to talk a little bit about discussions you had with those owners?
Discussions focus primarily on the existing and future uses along that area. Now, the particular intersection is partially within the downtown code and partially not. So it is the boundary between the downtown code designation and your traditional suburban style zoning. So the community as well as staff felt the best fit for this location was neighborhood center, which allows for 2 to 4 stories in height, primarily focusing on residential.
And then medium urban center?
For which location?
Or Audubon, I'm just going down to the core type, just only so that the audience or those that are watching understand what the height is. The reason why I'm doing this is because it's just great for the audience and those that live in that neighborhood understand what the types are, because in District 4, residents put types, but then after that didn't understand what that meant. And so I'm just trying to, I personally just want to know medium urban center means this much height, this much density. This is what it'll look like.
So the minor urban center allows for 2 to 5 stories. Now, if you go to the medium, then that's 3 to 6. Now, there is an incentive associated with these place
Okay.
types. The medium incentive is to 10 stories, whereas the minor is up to 7. So there would have to be concessions made by the applicant in order to get to that additional height. Open space, public
And
space.
with incentives, is there a, I don't know what I want to call it, a list of items that would, in order for them to want to get their incentives, is there a list of items that this is how you get your incentive, or is it just based, how's it based on to get the incentive?
There is documentation on those, a list of those. Opportunities could be additional public or affordable housing in the area. It could be open space.
All right,
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, that list was adopted in 2013 as part of the original adoption by City Council. And it's not an all-inclusive list, but it does list some things, as Mr. Mavis mentioned, that outlined these are what you could do in form of earning an incentive.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Could you speak a little bit to some of the village's concerns that they might want us to know as they went through these place types?
Certainly. So the central city had just wanted to make sure they understood what the overriding, I would say, the main number one concern was understanding and explaining that this does not change entitlement. This is basically adding another page to a plan that's already been adopted by council to help guide growth along the light rail extension. So that it was just explaining more so what this meant in the overall big picture. They'll get another opportunity when the actual entitlement change comes to take a look at what the proposal is and then to make comments on whether or not that's appropriate for the area. So staff will also be conducting additional outreach with these particular communities to identify areas of change for retrofitting and stability. So there's a lot more to come. It's just one more, this is just the first step in many. So it's explaining all of that and making them comfortable and understanding. That was the primary concern.
In the South Mountain Village?
South Mountain, we had many meetings with that group, and that was just basically going through each one of those locations and explaining the current nature of those particular intersections, and then explaining what the current entitlement is and what the future growth could potentially be depending on each of those. And so it was a very eventful and very informative set of meetings that we had, and ultimately they did recommend that approval.
Any stations they particularly wanted us to pay attention to?
The two that they made recommendations on were primarily was the minor urban center for Audubon. They felt that the medium, getting to the 5 stories with incentive of 10 stories versus by right 6, they felt that that was a bit much for that particular site. So the Audubon Center, the South Mountain recommended minor, whereas staff felt that the opportunity site on the western side of Central provided an excellent opportunity for growth at that location, and the medium was something that came out of the focus groups, and the staff analysis had lent that particular place type to be the best fit. The other was the baseline road. Staff made a recommendation of minor for that particular intersection. And looking at the existing context and the overlays and regulations in place, we felt that minor was the best, but then the South Mountain recommended to actually go up to medium. So that is part of the recommendation, is to follow the recommendation of South Mountain for baseline only at this time to medium.
And did our airport staff have any strong opinions on the heights?
No, there was none.
Thank you. We have 2 cards, or first, Armando Ruiz, marked in favor, followed by Victor Vidalis.
Good morning, Madam Chairman, members of the subcommittee. My name is Armando Ruiz, and I'm here. I put that I was in favor of it, and you know, after now looking at it, I would say that I'm opposed to what's being recommended. When we met with in the focus group, our family owns property on Rozier and Central Avenue, approximately 15 acres of privately held property that there is no other such property along this route. And we had recommended that it be a minor urban center proposed for the corner of Rozier and Central. And part of the reason is we have a school there currently. Now, we're able to refinance that under IDA financing in 2017. And the new plans that we had was, instead of having the school spread out, is build 3 to 4 stories. It's just cheaper for us, and it's better use of property. And we were hoping that that recommendation that we had made would have survived throughout the process. So I'm surprised to find out that it was not designated as a minor urban center. We can probably do more with that area quicker than anybody else, along that corridor. So I'm available for any questions.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I could ask staff maybe why that it wasn't put a little more density. And the question of density always comes in to play. I mean, if you want, I don't believe that the light rail, prefaces again, works. I think it's highly expensive for the amount of people that it takes. It doesn't work. But if you're going to try to make it work, you've got to create density. And because, we live in Arizona, when we forget how beautiful, we know how beautiful it is out today, but when it's 110, 115 degrees out, people don't want to walk a long distance to be able to pick up either a bus or, light rail. Why didn't we put more density on that location? I mean, it's not my district, I get it, I'm not going to do that, but if you want light rail to succeed, you have to put bodies next to it. Why not? Just out of curiosity.
Madam Chair, Councilman DeCiccio, so as you'll see on the screen here, it shows Rozier Road and Central, and it shows a neighborhood center place type, which allows 2 to 4 stories. And the speaker commented on wanting to build a 3 to 4 story building, so it would be permitted as part of this place type. So it's even though it's called a neighborhood center, it doesn't mean that it's only 2 stories. It means in the overall framework of a place type, it's a smaller scale, which is that 2 to 4 stories.
2 to 4 stories.
Correct.
Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, when we met, because they came out and staff did a nice job, explained, but you're gonna have to jump through more hoops if you get a neighborhood center. Even if you go up to 4 stories, there's more hoops you gotta jump through. If you're designated as a minor urban center, then it's a clear pathway. And you're absolutely correct. The design that we're going to use is, you need to create shade structures. And the only thing that creates shade structures, you got to go up higher with buildings. And then from there, you can build the canvas that comes down. That's what works. If you put more barriers in front of us, there is no other property owner that it has privately held that much property that can move a development as quickly as possible. We live there, and we're always going to live there. It has a special, for us, a special purpose, and we want to create opportunities in our community. So give us that opportunity. Don't put barriers in front of us.
Thank you. Victor Vidalis.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, committee members. I do support this plan. However, I did not notice that they had also changed Rozier. And I'm a small business owner right on 6427 South Central Avenue. And all these centers do make sense, with the exception of the Rozier Road. I was part of that meeting. It was held in my building, and I clearly recollect that we approved it to be a minor urban center. So hopefully you guys will reconsider and replace that place type. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, I think we are happy as staff to sit down and meet with these gentlemen between now and the full council and further discuss the Rozier Road issue and what that place type is, because there was discussion with some community members as well about the neighborhood place type. So there's some support there for the neighborhood place type. Staff made that decision for the neighborhood place type, but understanding that there's a difference of opinion, we're happy to sit down and talk some more with them about it, and then come back and present some information to the full council when this comes forward, if the subcommittee chooses to move this on today.
Thank you. I think we probably want to continue to look at that. I also want to look at on Baseline Road. We have been having a lot of traffic problems on Baseline Road and concerns about density in that area. And I just want to speak with our streets department folks about traffic going east-west and what the impact would be as we add development in that area, because we have some pretty significant traffic problems
Okay?
right now. With that, Councilman Valenzuela, Vice Mayor Valenzuela.
No, I appreciate I appreciate what you're going to do, Ellen, in sitting down with these gentlemen just to clarify some of those things, and I guess that'll be done before this goes to the full council, right?
Correct, Vice Mayor.
Yeah.
And then we did get some questions about density at Station 3, the Audubon Center, and what if we had 10 stories on one side of the street and Audubon on the other, how that would work from a planning perspective.
So, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, I think one of the key things that the city is going to be striking a balance as we urbanize is how you have height and also integrate some open space. And so I see that development as a great way to have some high-intensity proposals on the west side of the street, and on the east side have the Audubon facilities providing more open space, providing an event center, and then the linkage along the Salt River of all of that open space and the trails that we want to have associated with that, along with the Plaza de las Culturas and what they're proposing on that west side with some open space integrated into their development as well. It really does lend itself to what has the potential to be a very good entry into the South Mountain Village area and really be something that will make Central Avenue stand out like it hasn't in years.
And what is the height at which the airport would become concerned?
So the airport height ceiling in this area, this proposal doesn't get anywhere near that height. I don't know exactly what is off the top of my head, but we can look that up for you. But it's substantially off of that. The airport height zoning and the zoning that the city typically does related to buildings only really comes into play at the ends of airport runways. After that, they're so high up that they typically don't have any issues with our building heights, outside of those takeoff corridors.
Great, thank you. Councilwoman.
I didn't, as we're speaking about it, I hadn't thought about it till now. What's the impact of a medium urban center that is going to be very active at a certain point going to have on the Audubon and the Rio Salado with the environment and the natural environment and the impact that it would have on that area, since it has been a lot of money has gone into preserving that area and making it into wetlands, and with all that traffic and noise, what does it do to the environment?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Pastor, it would be a significant enhancement to what the city is doing along there, because it is taking some older industrial use properties that have historically had more intense uses and transforming them into office, retail uses, and some medical office as well as part of their proposal. And so it is something that has the ability to, if you kind of picture development of what's happening today along Tempe Town Lake, the Rio Salado is our version of Tempe Town Lake. We took a more naturalized approach as opposed to what they wanted to do, But long-term, that's what you will see is things like the State Farm and those buildings happening along there that will be a significant development that will help bring people to see some of the natural beauty that's being replanted and helped move along the Salt River there.
No, I understand that. I get that, and I understand that. But with the impact of people, the impact of noise, the impact of trash, even though it's also going to our natural environment, we already struggle right now with that happening now within the Audubon area and the cleanups and everything else that's going on. I'm talking about what's the impact going to be on the birds, on the owls, on all the natural beauty that we have right now currently. How do we blend in both worlds, I guess is what I'm saying, and look at both worlds so that they both survive. And that's just more of a long-term looking at our environment in that area and what the impact it will be in there. Because we have people who travel all over the world to do the bird sightseeing. We also have, I can't remember right now, but we also have the little, can't remember the animal that we dig, and we have we set up natural home environments for them. And then we shift some of it during the seasonal. And so there's just a lot of impact that will happen with people. And so that's my long-term, I guess, discussion. I understand where we're going, but I think we need to look at that with an environmentalist or the Audubon and say how much flow can sustain itself in here.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Pastor, we'll be happy to put together a meeting with the Audubon Society folks, as well as the Plaza de los Culturas proposers, and we can sit down and talk with them about some of those potential issues.
So I will, would you like me to move ahead, or any more questions?
I guess it is important we move this one forward for the South Central Light Rail extension to move quickly, because I think there's a fair amount of changes that we might.
Madam
consider.
Chair, members of the subcommittee, that's correct. As you all know, that is advancing forward on a rather quick time frame, and so that is why staff is advancing this effort forward. It is a big picture general plan, so there are lots of details and lots of meetings to come. As Craig mentioned, we're happy to have a few more meetings here between now and the full council hearing that first week in March, so that we can have those discussions. I should say the first week in April, jumping ahead here, since we're already in March.
Because there are, I think, we may need to make some changes to this. Councilman DeCiccio?
Then one last thing, though, too, dealing with the Able on 50th Street. That was a promise made to them, I think, back in 2011, that they would be looking at a stop. It's an expensive stop, but it was a promise that the city did make to them, and I think it's important we fulfill that promise. So I'm glad to see that, especially in this part here. Thanks.
So I would like to make a motion to recommend staff's approval with the caveat of meeting with the concerns regarding, is it Rozier Road?
Rozier. Correct, Madam Chair. Councilwoman Pastor, I have Rozier and Central traffic issues related to the baseline road designation type, as well as meeting with the Audubon and Plaza de los Culturas.
Yes, so that's my motion.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion passes. Let our planning director stay for continued discussion of historic preservation.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, this next item is regarding threatened building grant funds for the WPA administration building at the Arizona State Fairgrounds. There has been a group that has been led by Jim McPherson, assisted by Michelle Dodds and a number of other folks, looking at trying to preserve the WPA building on the State Fairgrounds site. The picture before you shows the overall State Fairgrounds parcel, And then at the very bottom corner, you see where the WPA administration building is. That sits along McDowell Road. And so this building, Michelle will talk about some of the historic details of it and why it's significant, and then about some of the more detailed discussions that have happened, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Chair, council members, the building was constructed in 1938. It's approximately 12,000 square feet. And it was the headquarters for the Works Progress Administration. And it was a program that ended in 1943, and then Air Research occupied the site, and later it became State Fairground Exhibition Space. In 1993, a portion of the building was renovated as the office for the Roadrunners, and they left, and it's been vacant since 2005. Here you see a view of the building from the southwest corner of it. And here is the front entrance. This is right along McDowell Road, just east of 19th Avenue. And here you see the rear entrance of the building. This is a interior space, what it looks like currently, and then you see some other features of the building. It is very unique. It's cast in place concrete beams and columns, and then in between those are the adobe bricks, which are 12 inches thick. And it's used on other buildings in the fairgrounds as well. And it all started in July of 2014 when the state fair officials intended to demolish the building and replace it with an asphalt parking lot. They believed that, vendor space could generate about $100,000 a year. And so they were looking to demolish the building. And on July 15th of 2014, Maricopa County Superior Court issued a temporary restraining order that was requested by Preserve Phoenix, which is a local preservation organization. And then our Historic Preservation Commission held an emergency meeting and initiated historic preservation overlay zoning for the entire state fairgrounds. The state fair board approved a 1-year stay of demolition while, and the city agreed to hold off on the zoning case. So we haven't processed that zoning case to date. The working group began to meet monthly, again headed by Jim McPherson and attended by a lot of the people that you see here today. And we had Jeff Swan do a building condition assessment to look at the cost of rehabilitation. That's a lot of valuable information. We often do those building condition assessments when a building is threatened with demolition and deemed to be in a condition that's too costly to rehabilitate. And so generally speaking, after about a year and a half had passed, the State Fair Board met, and they weren't real happy with the progress that had been made. About $20,000 of cash had been raised, but a lot of in-kind donations, and I think Jim McPherson will address some of those in-kind donations later. But they agreed, though, for a 90-day extension to the demolition, but they had some conditions, and one that was by April 14th, basically, that $120,000 be raised. That's mostly for the roof. The estimated cost for the roof are about $160,000. And they also want an agreement from the city and the working group that if this benchmark is not met, that we would refrain from any other action opposing the demolition, and that the city would grant a demolition permit. Being we have a pending historic preservation designation, if they did come in and apply for a demolition permit, that would come to me and I'd have to say no to that. We can't agree to that because I'd have to say no because of the significance of the building. So we have not agreed to that. One of the things that we had discussed was the city giving some funds to go toward the rehabilitation of the roof, and staff looked at our funds we had available and recommended $40,000, and it went to the Historic Preservation Commission.
they upped that recommendation to $200,000. The $40,000 would be a 20-year conservation easement. A $200,000 grant would be a 30-year conservation easement. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you all may have.
Wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and take cards first, starting with Jim McPherson, marked in favor.
Madam Chair, members of
And thank you for your leadership on this issue.
Thank you. My name is Jim McPherson, volunteer board president of the Arizona Preservation Foundation, our statewide historic preservation group. And want to thank the Historic Preservation Office, the Historic Preservation Commission in their support of the project to date with the potential designation and their work and the financial support they've provided already. The numbers change. I mean, the numbers go up, and currently we're at about $221,000 in cash and in-kind contributions. That breaks down, and because it changes, I can give you a specific rundown. But it is not just the cash and in-kind donations that are important. They are important, definitely. But we have a tenant. We have a potential for a second tenant. We have 3 developers in town who are interested in looking at the fairgrounds, or this building and some other historic buildings on the fairgrounds as potential renovation projects. We have other state agencies, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Tourism, the Department of there's another one, that are interested in using the building as well for their space. We've been talking with potential, all those advocates who are looking to bring in downtown with Grand Avenue, with Midtown, as a circulator with the fairgrounds. So it's this wonderful community outpouring of support that has come together. Cash is important, and we will continue to raise funds. It's this this hurdle of the roof, getting the roof done. That is the main issue, and with this financial support, in addition to the cash and in-kind that we've collected so far, I think we can go over that hump and continue to build on the momentum that we've had so far. Any questions or clarifications? And I want to thank many community members who have participated, not only from the neighborhood, developers, business owners in the area. It's just been this great outpouring of support, and this would be a capstone to help in that continued effort. Thank you.
Knowing that we have limited funds for threatened building, this is where we should be putting a big chunk of it.
I believe so. As a preservation advocate, a historic building is a historic building. And you can look at other buildings in the city that, for example, the Carnegie Library, city-owned. It is, but leased to the state of Arizona. The state of Arizona is providing financial support for the renovation of the roof. This is we're one city, one state. We should be working together, and the jurisdictional issues are important. But this is a key building, not only in and of itself, but as part of the state fairgrounds, and District 4.
Excellent. Thank you for many, many hours of working on this.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Derek Horn.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. For the record, I'm Derek Horn, and I'm a former city employee and currently a member of the HP Commission. But I'm actually here as a concerned citizen and part of the group that Mr. McPherson has been leading to save the building. I'd just like to add my voice and support for the preservation efforts of the WPA building, specifically the alternative recommendation from the Commission, which is recommendation number 2 in your packet. But we appreciate your consideration and any assistance that you can provide. With your help, we come closer to preserving a piece of the city's architectural heritage. Thank you for your help, and I appreciate your efforts and those of the staff as well. Thank you.
Bill Shield, Chair of our Historic Preservation Commission.
Thank you, Councilwoman Gallego and members of the subcommittee. I want to put this in a little bit larger context. As the aerial photo that Michelle showed early on, this building is just one of about half a dozen historically eligible buildings on that site. And the reality is that using state fairground math, virtually all of those buildings are going to be more valuable as vendor space over time than they are as historic buildings when the state has so far little or no money for maintenance of these buildings. So if we allow this building to be demolished, it really sets the pattern for the rest of that entire fairgrounds, and we're going to have 80 acres of pavement in the middle of what should be one of the most vibrant neighborhoods in the city. So this request is really bigger than this individual building, but I think it can be a first step in transforming the entire fairgrounds into an economic engine for Central Phoenix. And so, as Michelle's presentation pointed out, what the Fairgrounds Board requested was $120,000 in fundraising, or they were going to initiate demolition. We don't want to be in a position where we give them an excuse to start this cycle of demolition. So while the Historic Preservation Commission really put a ceiling of $200,000 on this request, I think certainly our priority as a commission is meeting that challenge from the Fairgrounds Board, and $120,000 commitment at this point, understanding that it is matching, that there is a 30-year easement, all of those conditions, I think really puts the burden back on the fairgrounds to take care of the property they own and should be responsible for, but does not put the city in the position of being blamed for the potential demolition of this building. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, and thank you for your leadership as well as the commission's leadership on this in partnership with our team led by Michelle. We have several cards marked in favor of the $200,000 commitment, and I will turn to Councilwoman Pastor, whose district includes this important building.
I have many questions. What would be the total cost to renovate that whole building?
Councilwoman, the stabilization based on our building condition assessment is about $400,000. The total rehabilitation of the building will depend on what tenant goes in there, what those tenant improvements would be, but it could be around $1 million in total. But stabilization's about $400,000. With the roof, as far as we know at this moment, $160,000. We are in the process of having, working with the state in having a demolition of the false ceiling. There was some concerns from the state that there might be some termite damage that is more extensive than what our report said. So we're actually going back in with their board giving approval for us to do the demolition of the false ceiling. We're checking the spots to see if indeed that is more extensive, the termite damage, than what we anticipated. And so we should have the results of that information by the time we get to council. But generally speaking, $400,000 for stabilization as we know at this moment.
Okay. And then what is our total amount in our historic preservation GO bond funds?
Councilwoman, this is from the Warehouse Threatened Buildings program, and in that we have about $300,000 remaining from the 2006 bond fund.
And then my understanding, Jim, how much has been raised by private citizens?
Let's go to the correct page. It's in the amount of about 95,000.
Okay.
In cash, and the rest in kind from different businesses and organizations that want to provide their services.
And the in-kind that they're going to, the in-kind is for those that are going to do services to the building?
Yes.
And how much would you estimate?
So 221,000 minus 95,000.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Got it.
Got to get my calculator
I got it. Okay.
And more's coming in.
Right. So my understanding is that there is supposed to be a match. We were supposed to raise $120,000, City of Phoenix was supposed to raise 120,000, and then was there supposed to be a match by the state?
Councilwoman, our program, the way our program works, there's a dollar for dollar match, and we get a conservation easement in exchange for those funds. So that is the way that our program is set up.
Okay, so if we donate or say 120 up to 200, there should be a match on the other side.
That is the way that the program currently works.
Okay, and what guarantee do we have of that happening?
Well, Councilwoman, I did ask Winnell Costello, who is the director there at the Arizona Exhibition and State Fair Board that works with them, for confirmation that they would be willing to accept a conservation easement. And so she met with her board last week on the 25th, and they didn't agree to a conservation easement, and they did not disagree to a conservation easement. So I think they're just waiting to see what we come up with.
Okay.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Pastor, a condition of using our money, as Michelle outlined, is that they would have to have matching funds, and they would have to agree to the conservation easement, because we can't give money away to the public. Effectively, what we do in these programs is get money for a conservation easement to preserve that structure. So those would be conditions that staff would recommend that council continue on with through the process, and then it would be something that if they didn't fulfill those conditions, they would not get access to our money.
And generally speaking, we wouldn't allow someone to apply for grants unless they were agreeing to designation of the property as well. And
Okay.
I don't believe at this point they agreed to that.
My next question is about the GEO bonds. There's 300,000. What was the anticipated, what were we anticipating to use all that money for? For future buildings, for future items? What is the?
Yes, Councilwoman Chair, I have talked to a number of people who are interested in applying for those funds, but currently I have no other applications for those funds at this time.
And when you apply for those funds, what are you committing to?
Well, people make an application, and we would, make a staff recommendation, bring it to our Historic Preservation Commission, and then they would make a recommendation to the council.
Okay, because, and I guess where I'm trying to understand is I'm hearing concerns from staff regarding the 200,000. That it would take a majority of the funds out of the GEO bonds.
Yes, Councilwoman, we don't know when we'll have another bond election, and we often have emergencies that come up for use of the funds, such as, well, even the building condition assessment. The funds to pay for that came from that same pot of money. And so if we give the State Fair $200,000, that leaves $100,000 left in the pot.
Okay. And the state had requested, Gigi, is it 120,000?
Yes, our cash, and I have it right in the speech.
Okay.
And I get an opportunity to address that.
Okay, somewhere. Do we have any additional? Oh. here.
Oh, sorry.
Councilwoman Pastor had a stash of cards.
Sorry.
And if I may add, we have been holding conversations with members of the state legislature and the governor's office about support for this as well. So it's a multi-pronged project.
Shall we take Gigi George now, followed by Ginger Maddox?
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, I hope some of the other ones will come back soon. Anyway, my name is Gigi George, and I live at 1102 West Palm Lane. I've participated in every meeting from the beginning and was at the State Fair meeting on the 14th of January. I had a meeting with my councilwoman, Laura Pastor, on the 20th, and her chief of staff, David Longoria. Norma Kafer, my neighbor, was at that meeting, and I discussed with Laura the thing that they want us to walk away if we don't raise the money. And Laura said, to her everlasting credit, we're not going to walk away from it. So I want to thank you for that. But there are a couple of other items I would like to touch on as well. As you all know, I've been researching the State Fair for my forthcoming book out next year, and the background and everything. In 2006, there were 2 out-of-state consulting groups charged with developing a long-range master plan for the Arizona Exposition and State Fair. In 2009, the consultants recommended opening up the fairgrounds by upgrading some of the buildings and eliminating others. Well, the WPA building was the first one to be eliminated, but the report gave no evidence of consideration for the views of actual Arizonans. And this is the massive report. So I'm going to give this so I can finish what I want to talk about. Instead, the 130-page report alludes to the views of unidentified board members, executives and staff of the fair, and state representatives, all of whom merely fell in line with someone's suggestion to upgrade the fairgrounds. However, as of August 2014, and I have this documentation on this, and to this date, the Arizona State Fair has not engaged in any improvement on implementing the plan. Moreover, this massive report did not include any historic relevancy component in the plan. And of course, we all know the mining building dates from 1919. The second oldest one on the fairgrounds is the B.B. Moore Stadium, also known as the Grandstand. That dates from 1936. The other buildings were from 1938, and of course the Coliseum from 1965. I believe it is entirely too late for the Fair Management Board to begin implementing a 10-year-old plan by demolishing one of the most significant buildings on the fairgrounds. I'm asking this committee to recommend appropriating the full $200,000 to the whole council to help save the WPA building. I want that building to still be standing in 2017 when my book comes out, because I've already written in. It's restored and adaptive reuse, so I don't want to have to change that. Thank you.
Are there any,
Ginger Maddox.
Madam Chairwoman and the subcommittee.
Yeah.
I have a little stake in this because I have lived for 30 years, 1 block south and 2 blocks east of the fairgrounds. So I've been through a lot, and it's changed a lot over the years. I truly believe that we are at a crossroads. The fair has continued to deteriorate in interest over the years. I haven't gone in, I can't even tell you how long. I think it's time for us to look at what we have here in the state of Arizona and use our state fairgrounds to boost our economy, because it's not just the 3 C's any longer of cattle, cotton, and citrus. We've got a lot of other interests that can be economic boosters. And I think if we look around the country and we look at what other states have done with their state fair, it truly has become an advertising piece. I live in FQ Story, and I know that a lot of you know how our historic communities have really put their back into it to bring these areas up to standard. They've become lovely, lovely areas to visit. And I think that the State Fairground could be just the jewel in the crown of our historic districts, where we could go back to some of the ideas that we had a number of years ago about changing McDowell Road into an area that actually led to the State Fairgrounds. So I truly believe this is a point in time where we have a choice to either tear it up and put down more asphalt, or go to folks who have true visionary plans like John Dury. He drew up a plan that just was so exciting to me, and that's one of the reasons that I wanted to join this group, because if we have the vision and we start with one step at a time, we can create something that will, I think, will not only be a national tourist spot. I think it can be an international tourist spot because the state of Arizona is already that in the world. So I hope that you'll step forward and grant this $200,000. There may be $300,000 in the fund, but I can't see a better place to spend 2/3 of this money on saving our fairgrounds and making it a real jewel. Thank you.
Can you explain the warehouse, the fund of 300,000 and what its intention was?
Oh, yes, certainly, Chair and members of the council. Back in 2006, when the bond fund put together what programs would be used for preservation, we have 4 bond programs where people can apply for grant funds. And so one of those programs is the Warehouse Threatened Buildings Fund. And the funds were intended to be used not only for grants, but also things like building condition assessments that give us valuable information about a building that may be threatened with demolition. But it's to both, it's kind of a dual purpose. It's both to use for grant funds for buildings that are threatened with demolition, like the WPA building, like what you saw with the David and Gladys Wright House. We also used threatened buildings funds to do the building condition assessment there. But also for warehouse. We have lost a lot of our warehouses in the warehouse district, and so not only for threatened buildings, but to encourage rehabilitation of those warehouses, the funds, it has a dual purpose. Warehouses in the warehouse district and buildings threatened with demolition.
Wonderful. We have a lot of buildings in the warehouse character that are also threatened, and so just want to understand that.
Absolutely.
We cannot have everything with this pot of money.
Madam Chairman of the subcommittee, if I could ask Michelle to talk a little bit about some of the other folks who have approached her to use the funds for preservation of other historic structures, because that's really what it comes down to. And Councilwoman Pastor briefly touched on a little while ago about what those, we only have the $320-some thousand dollars, and we don't know when we're going to have another bond election, so we've got to be wise in how we use that. And so there are a number of other folks who have talked to Michelle over time about using those. I think it would be good for the subcommittee to understand.
Yes, Chair, Council. Michael Levine is one of the people we've actually initiated historic preservation designation on a couple of his buildings where he's interested in bond funds. And one was the synagogue that's over there, near Roosevelt Row. And he was looking for some funds to complete rehabilitation there, but it wasn't on the register. So we initiated it, and he hasn't filed his application yet, but I know he's planning to do that shortly. Also for one of his warehouses in the warehouse district. There's a church that's for sale right over here on Van Buren and 8th Avenue, and that church is beautiful. If you're not familiar with it, please drive by. It's a beautiful church. And the owners of it actually wanted to demolish it, but it's designated, and so, we said no to a demolition. But in the meantime, they're trying to sell it, and so some of the people that are interested in purchasing it have approached me and talked about bond funds for that purpose. And so those are just a couple of examples, but I probably get a call every couple weeks with someone interested in those funds, but to date, I don't have any solid applications.
Councilwoman.
So staff's probably not going to like what I'm going to say, but I am going to make a motion, and I am going to recommend, I'm going to support the NHD subcommittee for $200,000.
And just so your colleagues can understand, so 120 is what we need to save it, and 200 is for negotiating room? Or not save it permanently, but the next milestone.
I know when the commission made their recommendation, they did say up to $200,000, and that's typically what we do because sometimes the rehabilitation costs don't utilize all that money, and then with the conditions attached generally.
So up to $200,000.
Madam Chair, Councilman Pastor, I would just also reiterate for the record that I think you want to attach the same conditions that the HP
Yes.
Commission did, the 30-year stay, those other things that were part of their motion.
Yes, you want me to read it all?
No, I just want to make sure that you acknowledge for the record that those things go with it as well. So I think
So
that's
yes,
okay.
I am going to say, recommend that the city require the state to provide dollar-for-dollar match, that the term of the easement be extended to 30 years, and that the community also contribute funds to rehabilitate the building.
Second.
Wonderful, and I am not going to be supporting the motion because I've been encouraging people to pursue this money for other projects, and so I was comfortable with 120,000, but at $200,000, I just feel like having gone out and asked people to pursue the money, I have an obligation, and those are projects that are important to my district, so.
The Sheraton's also very important to us too, so.
Which is not in my district?
No, but I'm just saying.
Okay.
It'll
still pass?
Second, I mean, we're voting, right? So
Mhm.
all those in favor?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yay, aye.
All those opposed? Passes 2 to 1.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mhm. Housing Department Capital Program Update.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. It is that exciting time of year, the city's budget season, and soon you will be asked to vote on the city's capital improvement program, the 5-year capital improvement program as part of the city's budget. So we appreciate the opportunity today to come and talk to you a little bit about specifically the Housing Department's capital improvement budget. With me today is Titus Matthew, Deputy Director in Housing Over Management Services. I'm going to dive right in. The Housing Department has $36 million in capital improvement funds budgeted over the next 5 years. The $36 million is made up from several different sources, including Capital Fund Program, which is comes directly from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development specifically for public housing. And that's formula-based. We get about $2.4 million a year, and that goes for modernization and rehabilitation of public housing. The other funds we get from HUD are home funds, which are dedicated to creating affordable housing in the city. And so we generally loan out those home funds, and we just did that through a call for interest that you all voted on last month. And then we have other capital funding, which includes leftover Hope 6 funds for the next phase of Frank Lake Addition, several project or property-specific capital funds for senior centers, our senior properties, and then lastly, some general obligation funds that we have designated for UMOM, New Day Center, but it's programmed out to 2021. We're hoping someday we actually get to give them that money. Just quickly, this shows you that most of our funding comes, about 75% of our funding comes directly from HUD for capital improvements. Most of that is home program, 50%, and the rest is the capital fund program for public housing and the other. An example of what we do with the capital fund program for public housing is the remodel and modernization of Foothills Village, which is going on right now. Foothills Village is a 200-unit public housing property down at 7th Avenue and Alta Vista. It was built in 1970, and it is in dire need of modernization. So you can see here what we're doing right now is remodeling the kitchens and the bathrooms. This is a picture of the kitchens where we're making them wider and more accessible. We had we need a number of accessible units in there. So you can see this kitchen is easily accessible through the sink, and it's much wider and easy to maneuver. Another example of our use of capital funds with the home program is Cedar Crossing, which is a brand new, just had their grand opening last week. Native American Connections built this. It's a 74-unit affordable housing property right at 3rd Street and Virginia, so right in the area of light rail. It's a perfect location. The city has about $2 million of home funds invested in this project. That's a little short overview of our capital improvement program, but we do use all that money to support quality, affordable housing opportunities for all of the Phoenix low-income residents. And we're here to answer any questions if you have any questions about it.
Very excited for some investments. We have great residents, and we're going to help them get even better facilities. We've been in early conversations with the Herberger School, and I was trying to understand 1% for the arts and how that applies to the Housing Department capital budget.
Chairperson Gallego, members of the subcommittee, we can certainly get that information from the arts. I don't believe anybody from arts is here.
It's unfair to expect anyone from the arts to be here, but
But we can certainly get that information to you in your office.
fabulous. just as we look for tools for placemaking and to capture the wonderful history and uniqueness of each of these communities, I think arts needs to be an important component of housing. Vice Mayor.
Thank you for the presentation. I don't really have any questions for this. So this is just for information, correct?
Wonderful. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
With that, we will move on to call for future agenda items. With that, we are adjourned.